Revelation's main message explained without speculation. If I asked you how you feel about the book of Revelation, many of you would probably say the same thing: confused, curious, maybe even a little afraid. For some believers, Revelation feels like a locked room in the Bible, filled with symbols, beasts, numbers, and warnings that seem impossible to understand without charts, timelines, or expert commentary. Others avoid it altogether, worried that they will misunderstand God or fall into fear. And yet, this final book of Scripture was never meant to confuse faithful believers or push them into endless speculation. Revelation was written to be read, heard, and kept. That means it was given for ordinary Christians, not just scholars, and not only for people living at the very end of history. From the very first verse, God tells us this book is a revelation, not a riddle. It is an unveiling, a pulling back of the curtain so we can see reality as God sees it. Not to guess dates, not to predict headlines, but to strengthen faith, deepen worship, and steady the hearts of believers living in difficult times. Too often we approach Revelation asking the wrong questions. We ask, who is the Antichrist? When will this happen? What current event matches this verse? But the first readers of Revelation were not trying to decode the future. They were trying to survive faithfully in the present. They faced pressure, persecution, compromise, and fear. And God did not send them a timeline. He sent them a vision of Jesus Christ, reigning, victorious, and worthy of their trust. When you strip away speculation, Revelation speaks with surprising clarity. It tells us who is truly in control. It exposes the emptiness of false power. It reminds suffering believers that their faithfulness is seen, valued, and never wasted. And it lifts our eyes from chaos on earth to the throne in heaven, where God reigns unchallenged. So as we begin, I want you to let go of fear. Let go of the pressure to figure everything out. Revelation is not asking you to become an expert in symbols. It is inviting you to become faithful. It is calling you to worship Jesus, resist compromise, endure with hope, and trust that God's purposes will stand no matter how dark the world may appear. If we read Revelation this way, without speculation, we may discover it is not the most frightening book in the Bible, but one of the most encouraging. Who Revelation was written for and why that matters. Before we try to understand what Revelation means, we have to understand who it was written to. This book was not dropped from heaven into a future generation obsessed with timelines. It was written to real people living in real cities facing real pressure. Ordinary Christians trying to follow Jesus in a world that did not reward faithfulness. The first audience was made up of churches struggling with fear, compromise, persecution, and spiritual fatigue. Some believers were suffering openly for their faith. Others were slowly blending in, adjusting their beliefs to avoid trouble. Revelation speaks to both. It comforts the suffering and warns the comfortable, and that already tells us something important. This book is not primarily about predicting the end of the world. It is about teaching God's people how to live faithfully in the middle of a broken one. When John wrote Revelation, these believers were not asking what year will Jesus return. They were asking, is it worth holding on to Christ when it costs so much? They were asking, does God really see what we are enduring? They were asking, has evil already won? Revelation answers those questions directly and powerfully. This is why reading Revelation only as a future timeline misses its heart. God was speaking to people who needed courage, clarity, and hope. He was reminding them that loyalty to Jesus mattered more than comfort. That compromise, even small compromise, slowly dulls the soul. And that faithfulness, even when unseen by the world, is precious in heaven. When we read Revelation with the original audience in mind, it becomes deeply personal. Suddenly, it is not about decoding symbols, it is about examining our own lives. Where are we pressured to compromise? Where are we tempted to stay silent instead of faithful? Where are we growing tired and tempted to give up? Revelation still speaks because the struggle has not changed. The names and settings are different, but the challenge is the same. Will we remain faithful to Jesus when following him is costly, uncomfortable, or unpopular? Revelation was written to answer that question with a resounding yes. Jesus at the center, not the end times at the center. One of the biggest mistakes people make when reading Revelation is putting the end times at the center of the book instead of Jesus. But Revelation does not begin with disasters, beasts, or judgment. It begins with a revelation of Jesus Christ. Before anything else is shown, we are shown him. Jesus is not introduced as distant or passive. He is alive, glorious, authoritative, and fully in control. He walks among his churches. He knows their works. He sees their suffering. He corrects them when they drift. And he encourages them when they endure. Revelation makes it clear that history is not spinning out of control. It is moving under the authority of Christ. Every vision in Revelation flows from who Jesus is. He is the faithful witness. He is the firstborn from the dead. He is the ruler of the kings of the earth. That means no empire, no system, no power operates outside his permission. Even when evil seems loud and dominant, Revelation reminds us that Jesus is still on the throne. This changes how we read the entire book. Instead of asking how frightening the future might be, we begin asking how trustworthy Jesus is. Instead of obsessing over symbols, we are drawn into worship. Instead of fear, we find confidence. Revelation does not hide Jesus behind symbols. It reveals him through them. He is the Lamb who was slain, showing us that victory comes through sacrifice, not force. He is the Lion who reigns, showing us that humility is not weakness. He is the Judge who sees truth clearly, showing us that justice will not be ignored forever. When Jesus is at the centre, Revelation becomes steady ground rather than shaky speculation. It teaches us that the future belongs to Christ, and therefore so does our present. If we trust him, we do not need to fear what is coming. We need to remain faithful where we are. The language of symbols and why God uses it. One of the main reasons Revelation feels difficult is because it speaks in symbols. Dragons, beasts, lampstands, seals, trumpets, and visions that feel more like dreams than straightforward teaching. For many readers, this is where confusion sets in, but symbols are not a barrier, they are a bridge. God did not choose symbolic language to hide the truth from his people. He chose it to reveal truth in a deeper way. Symbols communicate meaning that plain facts cannot always carry. They shape imagination, stir the heart, and stay with us long after specific details fade. Revelation uses symbols not to give us secret codes, but to give us spiritual clarity. Almost every image in Revelation has roots in earlier scripture. This means Revelation is not inventing new ideas. It is gathering familiar biblical themes and presenting them in powerful visual form. When Revelation speaks in symbols, it is inviting us to see reality through God's eyes rather than forcing us to calculate outcomes. The danger comes when we treat symbols like puzzles to be solved instead of messages to be received. The moment we start turning symbols into exact timelines or modern identifications, we drift away from the purpose of the text. Revelation was never meant to give mathematical precision. It was meant to give moral and spiritual clarity. Symbols also protect the message. They speak powerfully to believers while resisting misuse by those seeking control or domination. They invite humility, reflection, and prayer, and they allow the same message to speak across generations, cultures, and circumstances without being locked to one historical moment. When we read symbols with humility, Revelation becomes clearer, not more confusing. We stop asking what each symbol predicts and start asking what each symbol reveals about God, evil, faithfulness, and hope. And that is where the real power of the book is found. The real conflict, who you worship. At its core, Revelation is not about secret enemies or future technology. It is about worship. Every major conflict in the book comes down to one question: who will you give your allegiance to? Revelation shows two opposing centers of worship. On one side is the throne of God, surrounded by praise, humility, and truth. On the other side are false powers that demand loyalty, promise security, and reward compromise. The conflict is not subtle, it is constant, and it is deeply personal. This is why Revelation focuses so much on allegiance rather than prediction. The beasts and false powers are not just future threats. They represent systems, values, and authorities that compete for our loyalty right now. They ask for our trust, they shape our identity, and they slowly pull our hearts away from God if we are not paying attention. Worship in Revelation is not just about songs or ceremonies. It is about who defines your life, who shapes your decisions, who you trust when pressure rises. Every person in every generation faces this conflict. Revelation simply pulls back the curtain and shows us what is really happening beneath the surface. This is also why Revelation speaks so strongly about compromise. Small compromises do not feel dangerous, but they reshape our worship over time. Revelation warns that divided loyalty leads to spiritual blindness, but it also promises that faithful worship leads to life, clarity, and peace. When we understand this, Revelation becomes intensely practical. It challenges us to examine where our loyalty truly lies, not in dramatic future moments, but in daily choices. Who do we trust? Who do we follow? Who do we worship when it costs us something? Revelation's answer is clear and steady. God alone is worthy, and choosing Him, again and again, is how believers overcome, not just at the end of history, but every day they follow Christ. Suffering, patience, and hope for believers. One of the most honest things Revelation does is acknowledge suffering. It does not minimize it, it does not explain it away, and it certainly does not promise believers an easy escape from it. Instead, Revelation speaks directly to those who are tired, pressured, and hurting, and it tells them that their endurance matters. Revelation repeatedly calls believers to patience and faithfulness, not because suffering is good, but because God sees it and will respond to it. In a world that celebrates quick results and visible success, Revelation honors quiet endurance. It reminds us that faithfulness is not measured by comfort, popularity, or power, but by loyalty to Christ when obedience is costly. This is why victory in Revelation often looks different than we expect. The faithful conquer not by force, but by witness, not by dominating, but by remaining true. Revelation shows believers who suffer loss, rejection, and even death, yet are described as victorious. That alone reshapes how we define success in the Christian life. Hope in Revelation is not wishful thinking. It is grounded confidence. God is not distant from suffering. He hears the cries of His people, He keeps record of faithfulness, and He promises that endurance is not forgotten. Revelation assures believers that suffering is real, but it is not final. This message still speaks powerfully today. Many believers suffer quietly. Some face pressure at work, tension in families, or isolation because of their faith. Revelation meets them where they are and says, "Hold on. Your faithfulness is seen, your obedience matters, and your hope is not misplaced." Judgment as truth, not speculation. Judgment is one of the most misunderstood themes in Revelation. Too often it becomes fuel for fear, curiosity, or endless debate. But Revelation presents judgment not as a puzzle to solve, but as truth revealed. Judgment in Revelation is not random or impulsive. It is God bringing clarity to a world filled with deception. It is the exposure of evil, injustice, and falsehood that have long gone unchecked. Revelation shows that nothing hidden remains hidden forever. Every lie is uncovered, every injustice is seen. This is not meant to satisfy curiosity about the future. It is meant to reassure believers in the present. It tells them that evil does not get the final word, that power built on cruelty will not stand, that God's patience does not mean indifference. Judgment in Revelation also calls people to repentance. Again and again, opportunities are given to turn back. The tragedy is not that judgment comes, but that many refuse to respond to truth when it's revealed. Revelation shows God as just, patient, and consistent, not harsh or unpredictable. For believers, this is good news. It means our faith is not naive, our trust is not misplaced. God will set things right, He will judge fairly, and He will vindicate faithfulness. When we remove speculation, judgment becomes a source of hope rather than fear. It reminds us that God is serious about justice, truth, and righteousness, and it invites us to live with integrity now, knowing that what we do in faith truly matters. The new creation. The goal, not the debate. Revelation does not move toward destruction as its final word. It moves toward renewal. This is where many readers are surprised because the book so often gets framed as a story about how the world ends. But Revelation is actually about how God restores. The final vision is not escape from creation, but the healing of it. The closing chapters lift our eyes to a future shaped by God's presence. Not a distant heaven disconnected from reality, but a renewed creation where God dwells with His people. Pain, death, mourning, and injustice are no longer allowed to define life. What was broken is made whole, what was lost is restored. This matters deeply because it shows us what God has been working toward all along. Revelation does not end with believers floating away from the world, but with God coming near. His presence is the reward, His nearness is the promise, and life, as it was always meant to be, is finally realized. This vision gives meaning to faithfulness now. Our obedience is not wasted, our hope is not abstract. Revelation shows that what God begins, He finishes, and the future He promises is not cold or distant, but full of life, beauty, and peace. When believers understand this, Revelation stops being about fear and becomes about longing. Longing for God's presence, longing for justice, longing for healing. The new creation is not just an ending, it is the destination that gives purpose to everything that comes before it. What Revelation calls believers to do today. After all the visions, symbols, warnings, and promises, Revelation brings us back to a simple question: how should we live now? Revelation does not call believers to panic or obsession. It calls them to faithfulness, to watchfulness that produces obedience, not anxiety, to holiness that grows out of love, not fear, to courage rooted in trust, not certainty about the future. The book repeatedly blesses those who keep its message. That does not mean understanding every symbol, it means living in light of its truth. Worship God, resist compromise, remain faithful, bear witness to Jesus even when it costs something. Revelation reminds us that daily faithfulness matters more than dramatic moments. It is not written to make us withdraw from the world, but to engage it with clarity and hope, to live differently because we know who reigns, to love boldly because we know how the story ends. In this way, Revelation becomes a discipleship book. It shapes character, it strengthens resolve, and it teaches believers to live with confidence, not because they understand everything, but because they trust the one who does. When read without speculation, Revelation does not distract us from following Jesus. It sharpens our commitment to Him. It calls us to live awake, faithful, and hopeful, right where we are, until the day God completes what He has promised. Final encouragement: reading Revelation with confidence and peace. As we come to the end of Revelation's message, what remains is not a list of predictions, but a settled confidence. This book was never meant to leave believers anxious or divided. It was meant to anchor their faith. Revelation reminds us that history is not chaotic, evil is not ultimate, and faithfulness is never wasted. When we read Revelation without speculation, we are freed from the pressure to figure everything out. God does not ask us to master symbols or timelines. He asks us to trust Him, to remain faithful, to keep our eyes on Jesus when the world feels uncertain or hostile. Revelation reassures us that God reigns, even when circumstances suggest otherwise, that Jesus walks among His people, not above them at a distance, that every act of obedience, every moment of endurance, every quiet stand for truth is seen and remembered. This is why Revelation can be read with peace, not because it denies hardship, but because it reveals who is in control. It lifts our eyes from fear to worship, from confusion to confidence, from speculation to faith. The final invitation of Revelation is simple and steady. Stay faithful, keep watching, keep trusting, not with panic, but with hope, not with fear, but with confidence. The story is already moving toward restoration. God's purposes will stand, and those who remain faithful to Jesus will never regret it.